social media promoting degenerate behavior, showing a lot of outrageous content, especially in people's user feeds, especially on Instagram, of some of the most borderline pornographic content that you could even imagine. And then you have, of course, porn that's readily available, free for everyone. As long as you have an internet connection, you could get to it, and a lot of children are getting it to it, and it's rewiring their brains in very negative ways, over-sexualizing them, making sure that they can never have a strong family unit. And when you break down the family unit, you have more people being victims, you have more people being picked off, you have more people being on their own and left in a more vulnerable situation. And I think, there's many layers to this, and we could keep compounding it and we could keep connecting the dots, but there's a lot of freaking dots.
You know what it never was? That serious. It was never that serious. Quite frankly, will never be that serious. Never.
Lord Bibby 42 states, Noah Schnapp has played a gay character for more than 1/3 of his life, from age 12 to present, through puberty years, where the mind is easily taken advantage of.
I know a lot of girls that are tomboys.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make them in the wrong body. It is, everybody's different. Everybody's different. So did you think, 8 years old, I'm in the wrong body?
I mean, the idea never really came to me until I started using social media. Actually, I got my first phone when I was 11, and because I wanted to fit in with all my other friends who had phones at the time, I made my first social media account on Instagram and Snapchat. And on Instagram, I mean, I wasn't actually supposed to be using it so young, because the minimum age is actually 13, but they don't actually check that. Yeah. But I saw a lot of things on there that I really shouldn't have at that age.
Like what?
I mean, the content from other women, other young women, a lot of it is like they post themselves in like really like skimpy outfits, or like really really sexualized poses, or they're wearing like a bunch of makeup, or they've got like they like edit or like filter their bodies, or they even have like plastic surgery they're done on their faces or their bodies. And I mean, aside from that, a lot of it was just like complaining about like just how tough growing into a woman is, like how scary periods and the possibility of pregnancy and the pain of childbirth, and then eventually going through menopause. And I find that no girls or women really ever talked about like the great things about being a woman and the great things that come with all of those things. And I find that this, not only was it like this on the internet, but even from like the girls and women that I grew up around me with were kind of like that as well. I was told before my surgery that I would lose my ability to breastfeed, but I didn't really think this was important, because, I saw myself as a man, and men don't do that. And I could just use formula.
Years old.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't know what parenthood would look like for me, because I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about like getting my schoolwork done and fitting in. But
when that hits you, that I can't chest feed, I can't breastfeed a child if I want to someday.
And I realized, like, not only did I lose the ability to naturally feed my kid, but I also could, it's so much more than just feeding them. Like, it plays a role in it's an important part of the bond between a mother and her children. And I didn't know this, but when I realized that I took this away from myself, I felt like a monster. Like that was probably my worst. I was probably at rock bottom at that point, and I just spent a few weeks just at my absolute lowest. And it wasn't until like maybe like 2 weeks later, after I finished that lesson, that I was like, this is all wrong, and I regret every single step of this shouldn't have happened, and it's just made everything worse, and I feel like I'll never be able to go back. And that is true in some ways. I'll never be able to feed my children. I don't know if I'll be able to safely carry a child to term because I was so young when I started medicalization. But that night when I made the realization, it was kind of like coming out all over again. But even scarier this time, because like me and my parents and my family were so invested in this, and it was all for nothing. And I just felt like such a burden.
You apart.
Yeah, and I couldn't even bring myself to talk to my mom face to face about it. So I texted her, and nobody really talks about this, but the way you feel about transition will change over the course of 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, a decade, several decades. And there's kind of a honeymoon phase with each stage with each part of the process. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really know about this until I went through all of it. And I'm just trying to warn them now. They're all adults, and their parents can't really do anything about them transitioning, but I'm worried for them, and I don't want them to end up the same way that I am now, or if not worse.
When you first go through puberty, it is confusing already. What's the most compassionate thing a parent can do? Because your folks sound compassionate. What should I, if you were my daughter, what should I do to show support and compassion?
I mean, really the best thing to do is to show them love without affirming the delusion. Tell them that they're not a boy and they never will be, but you accept them as they are, and there's nothing that they need to change about themselves.
Right. But if you want to wear boy clothing,
it's no problem.
Right? How's your safety?
I mean, it's.
Don't tell me anything that you shouldn't. I don't want to make it worse for you, but do you fear for it at all?
A little bit, yes. I mean, I haven't been recognized in public, but it might be getting to the point where I have to worry about that. I mean, I have old friends in my area who strongly disagree with me, and they're not very friendly towards me. And I mean, all over the country, there's people like that who, I mean, I get really, really hateful, really violent threats sometimes. I had somebody make 2 accounts on Twitter just to tell me that they were making like a sex doll out of me, basically, out of my image. And some people threaten violence, or threaten to kill me or assault me just for speaking out and giving my piece.
Can you define what a woman is?
Adult human female. I actually know a few parents who lost all custody of their children because they won't affirm their kids.
Are they heroes or monsters?
They're absolutely heroes. Because they fight for their kids.
I have to tell you, I just love you so much. You came in and you smiled, and there are times that I can see deep sadness in you, but you are a delightful person. You really are great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bigger issue here, what's really happening is a spiritual battle that's taking place. And this isn't something that I've really heard many other people talk about, certainly no one who's gone through what you've gone through. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by a spiritual battle?
The very idea of a gender identity is it's it's very similar to a soul. A lot of people who identify as transgender call themselves like agnostic or atheists, but gender identity is sort of, it's like a soul basically. Like it's this detached entity that's part of you, but it's not a part of your body somehow. They're trying to change the definition of what it means to be female and male. It's no longer, to them, it is no longer about sex, but it's about a feeling.
Right.
I feel that personally, my transition and detransition was sort of a personal spiritual battle. Sorry, there's just a lot to this. There's
No, I know. It's a really deep statement. Because so much of the conversation around this is it is the most superficial one could possibly be when you're saying, hey, just because you feel this way, then that is who you are. Nothing could be further from the truth.
It's a very complex battle around this very superficial idea. Transitioning was presented as this cure this cure for my distress, and yet it kept making me worse.
Yeah.
In every way. My physical health started to deteriorate, my mental well-being started to deteriorate, and my performance in every part of my life, whether it be from school and even just taking care of myself, just dropped the further I went into it. But there were little moments towards the end of my transition, actually, that I think were an act of God. I remember one night I didn't realize it, but I was crying to myself for hours, and I was just in the fetal position in my bed, and I sort of snapped out of it, and I realized that I was just sobbing. I didn't even know for how long, but I was just covered in tears, and I got up and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I heard this voice in my head say, "You're not being honest with yourself. You need to grow up." I don't know what it was. It felt like almost like an older sister speaking to me.
Mm.
I think that was really one of the first moments that woke me up to the reality of things.
The spiritual battle is something that is not only affecting and impacting this whole debate and conversation around, gender affirming care and this trans ideology that's being pushed on kids in schools, especially from a really young age. We also see it, this question of identity is really what's at the heart of it, right? And we see this around identity politics, where people are, trying to play to one group or another based on, whether it's race or ethnicity, religion. You see a lot of people in politics racializing everything, reducing people down to nothing more than the color of their skin. Or you take your pick, and that's
a very superficial feature.
It's completely superficial, and it's so disconnected. You mentioned a lot of people who are pushing this are people who are atheists or agnostic, and that's really it. Because if you are identifying with a feeling or even the color of your skin, then you're not recognizing the truth, which is our true identity of who we all are as spirit, as children of God. And that everything else is, it's like wearing clothes.
Yeah, and I think in doing that, it's really them subconsciously looking for some sort of faith, grasping for something to believe in.
Yeah. It's no wonder, as you share kind of the mental anguish and the confusion, the depression that you went through. Now, as you look back, as you understand the truth, you can connect the dots and say, well, of course you're miserable. If you forget that you're a child of God, then of course you're going to be miserable, right? Of course it's going to cause confusion. And it's really powerful that you opened your heart to God to be able to understand that truth and to feel his unconditional love for you no matter what.
I don't think I could have gotten through this otherwise.
Yeah.
They're presenting being a woman as not a biological, immutable fact.
Yeah.
It's just a feeling. And yet in the way they do it, it's very superficial, very, very stereotypical, very oftentimes sexualized. And I mean, it's no wonder that a lot of young girls these days don't want to grow into women.
Yeah.
And by telling them that being a woman is just a feeling, you're telling them that there's a way out. And it's just not true. It just leads them down to a path quite like mine. It really sucked, and I started to feel the sense of isolation. And during my next school year, COVID came up, and they started doing all the lockdowns and distance learning and stuff like that. And that really reinforced the feeling of isolation that was already there tenfold. And, I started to withdraw because I wasn't really interacting with the outside world, and I couldn't really go out. And I started using the internet a lot more often. I started being exposed to these images of other women again, and subconsciously I started to realize I miss looking feminine, I miss looking pretty, and didn't realize it at the time, but I was starting to regret my transition. I didn't like the way that testosterone was making me look anymore, and I wished for a more feminine form, and I secretly started to buy makeup and skirts and women's clothing again. I would just wear it in my room without anybody really knowing. I wouldn't tell anybody about it because I was so ashamed of myself. It was a hard thing to admit, but I didn't really fully realize my regret with my transition until 11 months after my surgery. I was in a lot of distress by this point. I wasn't really performing well at school. I was starting to not really even attend my online classes, so my parents decided to put me in a different program for school. One of the lessons I had was on child development, child psychology, and maternity. And I learned that breastfeeding was not only a means of feeding your child, but it's also one of the main ways that as a mother you bond with your kid. And I mean, I never really thought about this before. This was really the first time that I ever really thought about being a parent, even because I was a kid when I consented to all of this, and I wasn't really focused on things like that. I was worried about school or fitting in or getting my assignments in, but I never really thought about how being a parent would look for me one day. Deep down, I had a maternal instinct that wasn't really fostered at all because I was being socialized as a boy. I believed myself to be a boy, and I was developing like a boy because I was on cross-sex hormones. I started to realize what was really taken from me.
Wow.
I realized one day that I really regretted my entire transition, every single step of it, from the hormones to the blockers and the surgery especially, because that was the most irreversible part about it. I wanted to talk to my mom about it. I couldn't bear to do that face to face though, because I didn't want her to see me with like the tears streaming down my face and the stress that I was in. I had a lot of shame and guilt about this because, I mean, it was this thing that I was invested in for so long, and everybody around me knew me as like their son or their brother or just a boy, and I no longer looked like a woman. I didn't know. It was hard to admit that I was wrong, and especially when everybody else around me supported me. I didn't know what to do. I just stopped taking the hormones, and I just kind of stayed confined to my room and my bed. It did help that my mom and dad would come to my door to check in on me and like bring me food and snacks, things like that. It was comforting, and I think that was one of the biggest things that kept me going.
They supported you no matter what.
And, you know, I didn't really have any friends in person by this point. Like the lockdowns and distance learning had basically like torn apart all my friendships, and the only friends I really had anymore were online, and I would talk about my feelings online, about regretting my transition, how I hated how it made me look and how it made me feel. I was kind of shocked because I was actually met with a lot of hatred from other transgender individuals attack me over it. I was told things like, "Oh, you weren't a kid. You knew exactly what you were doing to yourself. You were informed. This wasn't an experiment. You weren't wronged. You did this to yourself." They told me that if I kept talking about this, then it would make everybody else uncomfortable, and it wasn't bringing any benefit to anybody. It would just damage the community of real transgender people with real dysphoria. And I stopped speaking out about it. But during that period of time, though, I was also starting to naturally question like what happened and challenge my own views. And I was also interacting with other people online who either desisted or they stopped transitioning after a medical transition, or they're in the middle of like questioning their transition. And I realized like this isn't as uncommon as I thought it was. And this is a very real thing that's happening. And now that I'm going through it myself, I'm being silenced. And that's not okay.
How did that lay itself out after you had the surgery? And how did you come to the decision that the decision you had made was not a good one?
Not long after, I'd say maybe about a month or two, I started realizing that, you know, I miss looking pretty and having softer features in a more feminine form. But this was something that I kind of repressed for a while. It was, I mean, I was about 3 years on testosterone by this point, and I didn't even look like a woman anymore. I thought there was no going back and there would be no point. But at the same time, I would also buy makeup and skirts and dresses and just wear it in the comfort of my room or when nobody was home to see it. And this caused a great deal of distress for me. And after the surgery, I just kept getting worse. I just kept justifying it in my head as it being part of the post-op process, but I never really got any better. And it wasn't until maybe about 11 months after the surgery that I realized what the problem was. And, you know, I was taking a psychology class at this point. I had a lesson, I had a chapter on child development and parenting. And one of the lessons was about the Harlow experiments with the rhesus monkeys, the ones exploring like the relationship between a mother and her child, how things like physical affection and breastfeeding affect that. And I realized that my breasts were so much more than just sexual organs. I mean, they were a means of not only feeding my kid, but also I lost so much more than that.
And it's strange, right, in some ways, because you'd fought against this so hard. Why the hell do you think it made itself manifest as a desire when you were 16? Like, do you think you knew that you were really like on the cutting edge in some sense, you know, that if you kept pushing this, you were really going to sacrifice your ability to have kids? Or what do you think produced the realization?
I think, you know, I already had my guard down by that point, because this was around when COVID hit and there were all the restrictions put into place, and I was basically doing online school only, and I had a lot of isolation from the outside world, and this caused me a significant amount of stress, but it also allowed for a lot more time to be alone and reflect, and so it opened up my mind a little bit.
That's interesting. You know, even among chimpanzees, if you allow chimpanzee juveniles free choice, the males will pick trucks and wheeled things and gadgets, and the females will pick dolls. And the female chimps will carry the dolls around, teddy bears and so forth, for months and develop a very deep attachment to them. And, you know, one of the things, it's really necessary for young girls, and perhaps for young boys, but certainly for young girls, to play with baby dolls. It's really necessary, because that's all part of that practicing that deep female role. And, you know, without that, well, you don't have a chance. That's how kids think, eh? They think by playing. And if they don't have a chance to play that out, then, well, they don't explore that. And so it didn't even make it manifest in your own life until you were like 16 and had gone through all this bloody misery.
They really presented this as basically the only option to both me and my parents. And I also, the problem with me starting it so young was not only that I couldn't consent, I couldn't really fathom the full picture of things. I've also I'm still experiencing a wide range of complications to this day. You know, from the surgery, you know, I'll never be able to breastfeed. I'll never have that erogenous sensation in my chest back. I'll never have my breast back. A reconstruction will do nothing for me, and it might make things worse, actually, because I've had some complications pop up this year with the grafts. I have to cover them up with bandages, or else they'll. I don't know what's going on with them. I tried to consult my surgeon about it, and he didn't really investigate. He gave me advice that made the complications worse even, and actually temporarily gave me an infection. But I have to bandage up every day so that it doesn't like leak all over my clothing or bedding. And
Jesus,
from the hormones and blockers, I've been experiencing some joint pains, mainly in my arms, my legs, and my back. And
yeah.
I still have issues with my urinary tract. I have to use the restroom pretty frequently, and I didn't even know that this was possible. This is like a pretty huge quality of life issue that I'm experiencing, and I'm just not really getting any help for it. And on top of that, I do hate to speak about it, but I'm experiencing sexual dysfunction at the age of 18. That's something that women usually go through when they're in their 40s to 50s.
Right.
How was I supposed to know?
You know, I've been embarrassed for years to be a member of the Intellectual Academy under the current conditions that universities, what would you say, have put themselves into. And I'm equally embarrassed to be part of the therapeutic community to hear a story like yours. It's absolutely appalling what happened to you. There's no excuse whatsoever for it. It's such a dereliction of responsibility that it's almost unimaginable. So it's really too bad that you weren't listened to in a lot more detail and with a lot more care, you know? Because what you went through It's not that abnormal. You know, everything you told me about your unhappiness as a teenager, the fact that you were isolated in middle school, the fact that you had some doubts about your developing identity. It's like, yeah, that's pretty much par for the course for adolescents. Some kids get through it with a little less scarring than others, but most adolescents have a pretty damn miserable time for about 3 years. And so the fact that that led you down a path to hormonal transformation and then surgery, and that adults aided and abetted this, you know, I have some sympathy for your parents, because when parents are told, you better support your child or it'll be suicide, it's like, well, that backs them into a corner. But the medical professionals and the counselors who dealt with you, that their negligence borders, their negligence, it doesn't just border on the criminal, it crosses the boundary as far as I'm concerned. Chloe, thank you very much for talking to me today. And it's really, what happened to you is really unforgivable in my estimation. You know, you were very badly mishandled by the people who should have been taking care of you on the professional front. And you were, you know, offered a pathway forward that I can see to be highly tempting for someone in your situation. But there were many, 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 many other options available to you on the therapeutic front that would have resolved the problems that you've had to the degree that human problems can ever be resolved without having to wander through this bloody, catastrophic labyrinth of pain and suffering and confusion that you've been subject to for the last 5 years. And so I hope that you can get yourself back on proper footing and move forward. And I wish you all the luck there is on the legal front. I hope your damn legal system in the United States isn't so corrupted already by all this woke nonsense so that it'll be impossible for you to proceed. But I suspect that the medical community who's been complicit in this kind of butchery has an awful shock waiting for them on the legal front. That's certainly started to manifest itself in the UK with the closing of the Tavistock Clinic. And I think there's 1,000 lawsuits right now pending in relationship to the Tavistock Clinic. So the tide is beginning to turn, and when it turns, there's going to be an awful lot of reparations made on the part of culpable medical professionals and their counseling acolytes. So good luck with that, eh? And keep your head up.
Chloe Cole.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Chloe Cole, and I flew out here all the way from California. So, for those of you who don't know me, I am a former transgender kid. I'm biologically female, but throughout a good portion of my adolescence, I identified as male. I started by socially transitioning at 12, meaning I cut my hair shorter, started buying boys' clothing, and asked my family to refer to me by a new name that I chose. From the looks of it, you could probably tell that it didn't work out. No. A lot of you must be wondering, how does this happen? What led up to this? Well, there's several factors that make our youth quite vulnerable. I actually had a relatively normal early childhood. I had interests that were typical of a girl my age. I loved pink, purple, and blue, skirts, dresses, necklaces, dolls, and I also liked drawings, video games, and playing in the dirt or with my older brother's Legos or Nerf guns or toy trucks. As I got older, I started to associate with and relate more to boys, and I found it more and more difficult to connect with or even understand other girls my age. I started puberty at roughly 9 years old, so from a very young age, I dealt with both my peers and adults making uncomfortable or even hurtful comments on my developing body. I moved neighborhoods before entering middle school, and I turned to the internet because I had so few friends in person. Little did I know that as soon as I made my first Instagram account at 11, I would immediately be bombarded with trans-identifying kids, unachievable body standards, and even soft-core porn. I never stood a chance because that was just the beginning. Postmodern feminism taught me that throughout all of human history, women have been suppressed and oppressed, and still are to this day. Today's intersectional feminism has very little to do with women's rights. It has devolved into infringing upon the rights of others, while reducing women to sex objects in a costume that men can wear when they want to taste the rainbow.
Oh, a super chat on streamlabs.com/the Hake Report about that 18-year-old not morally straight guy, not a Christian. Lord Bibby 42 states, Noah Schnapp has played a gay character for more than 1/3 of his life, from age 12 to present, through puberty years, where the mind is easily taken advantage of. Ask him to sit on... Oh, gosh. I disavow this phrase. Anderson Cooper or Mark Ruffalo's lap. Lord, baby, 42. Have mercy. If he sits, then that confirms it. Confirms what? I don't want to ask. I don't want to know. Terrible. But thank you. Appreciate the support, man.
But what does
it's
that
that simple.
mean? What does that mean?
Well, adult just means fully developed,
right.
Physically, mentally, and human. Homo sapiens. I don't think I'll have to explain that, but female just means that you produce, or your body is centered around the production of the large gamete, the ova, the eggs. It's that simple. And just because you can't produce it doesn't mean, for reasons like menopause or being too young or having some sort of condition, doesn't make you not female. That's just
right.
You're not able to.
Right.